Hello and welcome to this debate here in Durban in KwaZulu-Natal. I'm Chris Bishop, the editor of CNBCAfrica, the continent's only Pan-African business channel. I've been a journalist all my life, nearly 40 years, and for the last 25 years I've had the privilege of reporting from a score of countries across Africa. Don't let this lack of grey hair fool you. I've certainly been all over this continent and seen some of the wonderful places that there are that tourists have yet to discover on this continent. We're going to be talking about a lot of the issues connected to that during this debate, and at the end we'll have a slight window for questions, so looking forward to you asking questions from the audience. But just let me introduce my panel. To the left of me I have the Minister from Zambia, Mr. Ronald Chilotela, who's come with us here. We have Pindili Makwakwa, CEO of KZN Tourism. Also, we have here Mr. Akwasi Agimang, CEO of the Ghana Tourism Authority. We have also Gillian Blackbeard, the Regional Director, Africa World Travel Tourism. And last but not least, we have Mr. Alan Renault, Principal Secretary, Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ports and Marines in the Seychelles. Now, the whole idea of this debate is to find out how more tourists, not only from the Northern Hemisphere, but also from the African continent, can find their way to the countries that many of you representing here. Now, starting off with you, Minister, there's a lot of bilateral deals between Zambia and South Africa. How do you think these are going to change the game?
Thank you. There has been a serious engagement between Zambia and South Africa. And I think I can confirm that between Zambia and South Africa, we have no visa requirement. There's a free movement of people between the two countries. That's why you can see that between Zambia and South Africa, there's been a consistent flow. And we are looking forward to increasing the collaboration, that we are able to increase the movements of people, goods, and services between the two countries. As you may be aware, Zambia and South Africa share a long history in terms of the regional bloc. We are all in the SADC region, and we are in the commercial region. So we have been able to trade, and we have been able to promote the movements of people between the two countries. That is the only way. The shared prosperity, the growth that is human-centered, that is the only way we can be able to achieve the desired results in our tourism industry.
So, Pindili, if I come to you, I spoke to the MEC earlier, who you're representing today. I spoke with Derek Hanekom, the former tourism minister, interviewed him for CNBCAfrica last year, and he said this visa issue could be solved, A, by the stroke of a pen, B, he said it would make a massive difference to tourism in this. Why is it a year later we're still talking about it?
Chris, I do believe that the commitment that has now been shown, particularly by our president, when he did the State of the Nation address, does indicate that there's much more focus and commitment in dealing with the issues. I am also aware that our new National Minister of Tourism, it is very high on her agenda. Remember, we've just come out of the national elections in May, and everyone is getting settled really into the new administration of government. And I have absolutely no doubt that in the next months we'll be seeing much more movement, of course, between the Minister of Home Affairs and our Tourism Minister to really deal with these issues, because we are very mindful of all the markets that we could be growing and that we are not currently because of issues of visas and access into the destination. And I'm very confident it will be resolved soon.
If I could go across the continent here to Mr. Akwasi Agimang, the CEO of Ghana Tourism Authority. Yeah. What difference would it make to Ghanaians if this country suddenly relaxed its visas overnight?
A whole lot of difference. If I should use the West African case study as an example, we have the ECOWAS protocols and the free movement of people. And consistently, for example, in Ghana, Nigeria has been in the top 2 in terms of arrivals. And so you see that kind of free movement of people. And I believe it can be extended across Africa. Then it will make a whole lot of difference to us. But there are issues. There are issues of language barriers, so many other issues that really hindering the progress that you will expect. And I believe it's time for us to deal with it, look at it dispassionately, and deal with it head on.
Gillian Blackbeard, if I could ask you, what do you think the sticking points could be, and with this visa issue, and what difference could it make?
Well, I think that we need to stop thinking about sticking points because we seem to have taken a long time already, so it's somewhat evident, and start looking at solutions. And if we're thinking about it, maybe we need to take the baby step solution. Maybe we shouldn't say, yes, we're going to do everything by the stroke of one pen. We start looking at visas on arrival. Visa on arrival is a more simplistic way and easier, more palatable to national governments. What about streamlined processing for visas, online visa applications, for example, driven by private sector? I know VFS does a lot of online visa application. It's more acceptable because right now we're sitting in a narrative where we're looking at security, we're looking at other issues. So maybe the solution isn't so much, we're going to do it visa-free across the continent. Let's look at halfway steps and achieve those first, possibly achieve things on a regional level. For example, good examples coming from Zimbabwe and Zambia, or the East African visa movement system, and also harmonizing visa policy. You cannot expect that if one country next door, if we're looking at international travel and routing, has one visa policy and their neighbor has another. Because what are we doing? We're hindering travel within that area.
I'll go to you, Alan Renault, of the Seychelles. As one of the smaller nations on the African continent, how do you, in sort of trying to punch above your weight, how do you approach this visa issue in the Seychelles?
Thanks. The visa is essential. 50% of our tourism, or 50% of our economy is tourism, and we pride ourselves on being visa-free. It's actually one of our USPs. In fact, earlier this year in March, we were at the first Ministerial ICAO, UNWTO Ministerial Air Transport and Tourism Conference, and a slide went up where Mauritius seemed to be ahead of us in visa openness, and it caused a furor at home. And what happened was we went back and we studied and said, well, look, what is Mauritius doing that we're not doing quick? We've got to fix this. And what I would like to say is the reason why for us it's so critical and why it's benefited us so much is we think about the tourists and we think of providing visas as part of civil service. You think of them first, like remove as many obstacles and difficulties for them, while at the same time, one of the challenges as well is security. You need to know who's coming into your country as well, which I think this is part of the challenge maybe for landlocked countries. For us, it was a little easier. But yeah, as long as you think about the tourists, why they make the decisions, what are the stopping points for them, this will help you figure out what you need to do. And so that's our focus.
If I come back down the line now on the other theme I want to explore here, do you think, Gillian, that this continent is selling itself hard enough? I mean, the amount of people I meet on the road in Africa, and they say, I've been to South Africa, I've been to your country, and I never knew there was such great stuff there and places to go, and that the service was great. Do you think countries like South Africa sell themselves hard enough?
I think I'll start with the first question. No, absolutely not. We don't, as a continent, sell ourselves enough. We don't sell ourselves uniquely enough. Sometimes people will ask, should we sell Africa as a continent? Yes, there's a concept of Africa as a continent, but the reality is 54 countries are very unique and each have their own proposition. When we talk about South Africa, in fact, I think they're doing a really good job. We've seen a wonderful example of their KwaZulu-Natal's marketing. It's fabulous. I think, though, it's not enough. And we still sit and think about our tourism marketing in a single blinkered way. It sells to the West, it sells to a certain target market, and maybe we'll talk about China. But in reality, we're not even looking at the large market. I spoke about intra-African travel, but there's so many other destinations we need to sell.
Mr. Agimang, from Ghana, if I could ask you this question. I mean, the tourists who come here from other African countries, or from neighboring countries, shall I say, I mean, by the time you get to Angola and Tanzania, it starts to tail off. It's mainly Zimbabwe, Mozambique. What about people in Ghana? I mean, what could people of this neck of the woods do to try and get thousands of people from Ghana every year coming here and also going the other way?
I think it's about three things. One, the visa regime needs to change, and I agree with Gillian if we could Start with the visa on arrival. That will make a whole lot of difference. The second thing is also the access. I mean, from Ghana, I mean, we pride ourselves to have connectivity, but how connected are we to the rest of Africa? I mean, there are no direct flights to Angola, direct flights to Zambia. It doesn't exist, and you have to go from one country to another. Sometimes you have to connect through Europe, and so we need to look at that also. And then also, thirdly, costs of even the travel, inter-Africa travel itself is quite prohibitive. If you were to move from Ghana to, say, the UK, it might end up being cheaper to go to, let's say, Seychelles, because you have to connect through Europe. So I think it's about time that, like Gillian said, we take baby steps, but look at where we want to go and how we clear the borders. In West Africa, for example, in as much as we have free movement, you move from Ghana to Nigeria, I mean, 45 minutes by flight, but if you were to do the road movement, so many borders. You meet customs, immigration, drug control, so many borders. And so it becomes a disincentive for people to move around.
But again, putting that awareness out, I mean, when I went to your country to report, I was reporting on grimy things like politics and mining, but we also went to see some of the beaches and stuff. I mean, it was like stunning and staggering. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. But again, perhaps it wasn't as marketed as well. But, I mean, do you think sometimes, Pindili, tourism isn't taken seriously enough as an industry? I've just mentioned mining there. People in this country, they fixate on mining and resources and whatever. And yet, I mean, was about 1.5 million people in this country. I mean, that's enough to form a nation. Work in the tourism industry here, something like 3% goes towards GDP. Do you think African nations, like the ones represented here, should take tourism a bit more seriously?
I think so.
No, I think it's yeah.
Yes, sir.
We take it serious, but I think the focus has always been to try and bring inflows from Europe and Americas. I think that's where we've gotten it wrong. If we start looking at Africa, I mean, to South Africa, to Angola, to Zambia, there are people who can come. We hardly do any marketing in East Africa. All our marketing is in Europe, America, and I think that's where the issue is, and it's time that we take that seriously. For example, in Ghana now, with our marketing, we've split it up into Africa, Europe, Asia, and Americas, to start looking at how do we bring people from within the continent to Ghana.
Yes, maybe just looking at the South African context, yes, there has been times when tourism took quite a long time to be appreciated. But as you can see now, the narrative is that it is the low-lying fruit in regards to not shedding any jobs and creating more jobs in a strained economy. So that commitment is definitely there at a political leadership level. I think what has happened when we do our strategy planning in terms of where we should be going, we have kept our source markets quite traditional. And it's your Europe, your Americas, now we're looking further into Asia. But we are now sitting back and saying, hang on, if our numbers, if for instance in KZN, you look at the fact that about 60% of arrivals are from Africa, and our focus though on Africa hasn't been as much as in Europe, then we're doing a whole 360-degree turnaround to say, let us start with Africa and actually go more aggressively. And so we are, as part of that, also relooking the brand. Back to the issues that were being raised earlier on to say, how do we sell ourselves? Maybe we're still selling ourselves in a traditional manner in terms of what used to work. We have many layers who are consuming tourism differently. And how do we target them? So I think the issue of research as well, in getting real insights that should be driving our marketing campaigns, is very critical. And what we're doing in KZN, we are saying, let's get an outside view of the destination, an eye that's unjaundiced, that will say, much as a destination you're doing pretty well, but you could be doing much better, these are the key issues you should be looking at in rebranding yourselves and marketing that much better.
But tourism is not an easy industry to run, Minister, as you know. I was reading earlier this week that you went to one of your famous resorts, Mundawanga, which I know, a botanic garden in Zambia, and you threatened to close it down because you thought it wasn't being run properly. How difficult is it sometimes?
You know, I have listened from the submission by the panelists, and as a policy maker, I was thinking, maybe the challenge we have is we are looking from the outside, We are not looking from within ourselves. The tourism first, we must begin promoting it internally. Once the local people accept, they will be our marketing agents. It becomes easy. If it is accepted by the people of Zulu nations, the Zulu kingdom, then it becomes easier for them to begin attracting other African nations to begin visiting. But if we are looking at, okay, we need to look at Europe, then because we know we are not getting that desired results as we are expecting from Europe, from Asia, from America, now begin looking at the African countries. Even before we begin looking at other African countries, let's begin growing the desire by the local people to appreciate that which we have. Once the local people begins buying in and saying, yes, the only way for us to go is to promote internal tourism. After we have marketed amongst ourselves, I was privileged to superintend over the affairs of infrastructure. It's very key for us to attract the foreign, the tourists, for us to attract our neighbors, even for people to move from one place to another for them to connect. But before we go to connectivity, I was privileged to be in Seychelles. And the best lesson I learned is the local people must begin appreciating them. You begin integrating them. They become our marketing agents. Then we begin looking at our neighbors. Then we look at, of course, the language barrier must be unattractive for tourism.
Sure.
I must be inspired to go to a Francophone country so that I am forced to begin learning French. I must go to Arabic-speaking countries so that I'm able to learn how to speak Arabic. So language must not be a barrier. So the desire for us to transform, even I have spoken to my colleagues back home. I have said it can't be business as usual. Of course, you are looking from outside. But before you start inviting other people to come from outside, you must begin creating design capacity amongst yourselves. Even if people, they don't visit you, you must be able to sustain the industry locally. I think that is how we need to drive tourism in our various countries and in our African continent and in our African blocks. Once we satisfy our national desire, then we begin attracting amongst our regional blocks, and then we go to the continent. Then we start attracting the international tourists to begin visiting our areas. And you see, tourism, I have every confidence that it can be the biggest economic earner for Africa.
Sure.
Once we do it right.
Absolutely right. Well, they're talking about the language issue there, Pinley. Just a quick question to you. You're talking about English, French, Arabic, maybe. What about in this country having resorts that specialize in Shona, Chichewa, Chinyanja, Bemba, the languages of sub-Saharan Africa? What about something like that in KwaZulu-Natal, Pinley? I mean, is it workable, you think?
Absolutely. What we've done is we have a program that's looking at training our tourism officers and especially the youth that get into tourism to actually diversify the language offering, because exactly that becomes a big hindrance to being able to connect. And so there are programs that are being run. I do think, though, partnership with trade is very critical in terms of taking that further, because you'd find that specific markets, they have very specific needs, whether it's cuisine, just really feeling being home away from home. And so if we make a promise as government, because ours is to do generic destination marketing, but the actual offering of a service is a trade level. And so I think sometimes there is a tendency to plan well ahead and not as partners go together, which is something we're now starting to work much more closer on, to say, let us have the offering together. The product owner, the tourism practitioner must also be ready to welcome the market.
So, Alan, if I come to you, I want to investigate the investment case now. I mean, clearly, you go around the world promoting investment in tourism in the Seychelles. In these difficult economic times, what kind of reception are you getting?
Thanks, Chris. For ourselves, it's still a difficult time, but people still want a holiday. People still want to get away. And what happens is you have to get better at the dreaming and enticing part of what makes your destination special. We talked earlier about whether Africa is marketing itself hard enough. Look, okay, you're having a difficult year, okay? You didn't get the promotion you wanted, but honey, we got the kids, we got to go somewhere. And so you still have to compete for that. And so from our perspective, we're getting better at knowing what we do. Know thyself, I think, is the most important thing, and sell that. And so for us, our tourism has grown 7 to 8% still. We thought it was going to be a difficult year, but it's still succeeding. We're still managing to get our branding message out there. So as long as you focus on what makes you unique, as long as you are welcoming, and I think an important point, Chris, for everybody, I think, which hasn't been said yet, is does your typical immigration officer know they're part of the tourism value chain? It's a different ministry, security, they have a different mindset, but they're part of the whole package. We saw the wonderful video from Jillian earlier, and imagine you have this incredibly enticing video to come to your country, and the minute you get to the border, you have a very dour person. Can you stand over there? Can you? It's inconsistent, and so you actually have to get them involved, and I think once you do, and you realize that that's what solves it, it helps a lot. It adds to the brand.
But what kind of a sell is this investment in tour in Africa? I'm going to come to you, Gillian. I mean, I'm showing my age now, but many years ago, I wrote a story about a man who went in to invest in a resort in Mozambique just after the war. And at the time, I thought it was a bit reckless. I said, there's still unrest in the country, there's still insecurity. And he said, no, I know. And 20 years later, he's got a thriving resort. But the point is, he said to me at the time, if he'd have gone to investors, they would have just said no, because of the insecurity and the risk in the project. What kind of a sell is tourism in this continent?
You know, I go out and I think on one hand, I think it's really, really tough. You look at the risk, you look at traditional risk factors of investment in Africa, and automatically you're going to say, no. But the reality, travel and tourism is a little bit different from traditional models of, for example, mining, where you have your economists and they take out the risk, etc. And you look at some of the destinations, these far and wide destinations, places like some of the stands, etc. And if you look at a specific market segment, the very difficulty and almost, if you could say, unattractiveness, something that is new and different and not seen before, is an attractiveness to a traveler, especially if you're looking at young people, you're looking at millennials. Remember, and I'm going to show my age, we've been everywhere. Everyone's done, sorry to say, Italy or France. It's been done. So the new traveler, the young traveler, or even the experienced traveler, people in their mid-40s, are looking for new experiences. And so when you're looking at investment and attracting investment even to difficult areas, for example, African Parks is opening up parks in Chad, which might not necessarily seem like somewhere that we would like to go. But by that very nature, it becomes something people want to see. And so you turn it on your head.
Okay, I'm going to come to the Minister in a second, but just quickly, Mr. Agyemang, if you could just give us an idea of the appetite that Ghana is finding when you're trying to get foreign investors in particular to pour money into your tourism industry.
I think it's growing. Ghana is quite a very safe destination, and so a lot more people are comfortable investing. We've packaged several products that are out there, and the response has been good. But there's also another category of investors that we are looking at, and that is the diaspora. If you look at remittances coming in about $3 billion a year, and these are people who are looking for opportunities back home to come back. And so that has also become a very good source market for investments for us. We also have products that are not so expensive to develop because we have the natural attractions, the waterfalls are there, we have heritage sites that are already there. And so the sort of investors, the investments that you're looking for are not something that is outrageous.
Minister, if I could ask you, I mean, Zambia, not too many years ago, had this reputation as this free economy. You had all these reforms over the last decade. How are you making it easier for business people to operate in tourism in your country?
We are making it very easy, and we believe that for any economy to be sustained, that to be driven, it must be a private sector-led economy. That's why we declared the free economy, so that we can begin attracting the private sector to come and drive the economy. The role of government must be for policy direction. We must be able to guide how the industry must be able to grow. And one key component for Zambia and for Africa, peace and stability. As we are saying, the tourism is not mining. Mining is a wasting asset. Somebody must invest in mining. They'll go out with a product. It's not agriculture. Somebody will invest in agriculture, they'll go with a product. The tourism is about setting the impression, what country we are. How certain am I to come to South Africa, to KwaZulu-Natal? How safe am I? Will I be free to move even at night? How free is it for a tourist to visit Zambia, to go to Victoria Falls in Livingstone? So as we craft the policies, as African countries, as Zambia, we are paying particular attention to things that begins projecting and giving a positive impression if we are to attract the foreign investment into tourism, for us to attract the tourists to come and visit our areas. This message is for Zambia, it's for Africa.
I mean, particularly, there's something else that strikes me about the tourism industry. Is often it's prone to things out of its control. Like I've just mentioned Mozambique, Cyclone Idai has devastated Cape Town. There's been a drought, which was nobody's fault. In other parts of the country, there are questions about crime and security. What can you do about that as a tourism authority?
What we've done is KZN. Maybe before talking about KZN, just 2 days ago, we were in Parliament. Portfolio Committee convened a workshop on a national tourism safety plan. And it's really a commitment to say, as a country, let's have one message around issues of how we're tackling tourism. And of course, a number of areas of possibilities are being looked at in terms of working much closer with security structures. Because it goes back to that issue that sometimes it is not necessarily a well-aligned approach. Someone who's taking care of security may be thinking, I'm not so much involved in tourism. So it's about to say, as a country, can we utilize what already exists in terms of capacity to just be more focused? So what is being explored is even issues of tourism police that you find in other destinations such as Egypt. And so that is a conversation that is gaining momentum. But back to KwaZulu-Natal, yes, we have had instances as a destination where because of particular incidents, and we know, I mean, if even one tourist being marked, it's one too many. And so it sets off a very negative perception of the destination. And between the city of Durban, which is the gateway to our destination, and the provincial government, we've said, let us be more focused on dispelling perceptions that crime is on the high, but also being realistic about incidents of crime and how we deal with them. And so it's really work in progress. But we cannot sit back and say it's not our problem, because it is at the heart of us bringing the numbers into the destination. And of course, issues of crime as well. But I think there's a particular narrative that perhaps is not so comfortable to discuss, and that is just how much as Africa do we take pride in being Africans. And so there are issues of perceptions of the continent, which I think really are largely because Africans, by and large, when you look at poverty levels within the continent, are not well-traveled within the continent because of issues of limitations of access to resources. So how do we as Africa make travel within the continent that much more easier so we understand one another better and we are more welcoming? And so I think really at the heart is the identity of Africans and being a much more friendlier continent within the continent. And so, of course, issues of crime also are about issues of those poverty levels that need to be addressed so that criminality is also then dealt with decisively.
Mr. Agimang, if I can ask you this question, it's a very fashionable thing these days to talk about brand ambassadors and influencers online. In West Africa, in Ghana, I mean, is this taking root? Do you have faith in this new way of marketing countries?
Yeah, I think we do, especially for us when it comes to domestic tourism. We have brand ambassadors from different parts of the country who speak the language of what the tourism authority wants to convey, and that, for us, is working. The challenge is when you extend it internationally. I mean, the cost of having a brand ambassador, for example, in the US for Ghana or for South Africa for Ghana, is something that sometimes is quite prohibitive. But by and large, I think we've been able to use them for domestic tourism, which is really the catalyst for every tourism to grow. If your people are not traveling within country, then there's nothing that you can do. And so far, we've seen growth year on year in our domestic movements of people around.
And Gillian, I mean, how do you feel about this? The fact that so many people these days are being paid just to tweet and Instagram with this thing. I know it's gathering pace, but I know it's a great risk as well. I mean, what do they say? What the gods can intend to destroy, they put on the internet first.
True. I mean, there are a lot of people being paid and who do very well, but I think, especially if we're looking at smaller tourism boards, which most of our African tourism boards are challenged by resources, we need to look at organic brand ambassadors. And what I mean by that is people who are out there traveling for the sheer love of out there traveling. And it can be on a domestic level, people traveling and user-generated content that isn't paid for. But you can also, as a destination, align yourself with brand ambassadors that have a special interest in your country. For example, when I was in Botswana Tourism Organization, we were looking at conservation issues and relocating rhinos. And at the time, we linked up, and it was a private sector initiative led by Wilderness Safaris and De Beers at the time, but they linked up with Uma Thurman, who then helped with the relocation process. And you can look at things that are coincidental. Coming back to Botswana, there's the whole Meghan and Harry issue. You didn't need to pay for them. And I think sometimes you need to let them be organic. Don't even jump on it, because the very reason why they came to that country was because they didn't capitalize on that brand ambassadorialship. So go organically.
Ellen, just one last comment about the online possibilities for tourism, and then I'm going to open up to the floor for questions. We're running out of time.
Yeah, I would just like to support what Gillian said. For us, we want it organic. We can't afford to pay for tweets. We rely heavily on brand ambassadors. We're fortunate that we have a lot of Seychelles abroad and others who love our country and do it for free. We train them about how to sell the destination. And they love it. They come once a year. And so for me, one of the strategies that we had was to find ways to actually work with Google to make sure that people could actually take photos from exactly where they were, because we hadn't mapped out our islands properly. It's a little tiny place. And it was, again, to encourage that organic interest, and it's worked very well for us.
Well, thank you very much so far for our esteemed panel. I'm going to turn out now into the audience. We've got time for one or two questions. Just put your hands up, and the man with the mic will make sure that power is lent to your voice. Yes, madam. Who's the question for? Anybody specific?
To the whole panel.
Okay.
I'm Nelly Swart from the University of South Africa. I just have a question. If we go the e-visa route, how are we going to accommodate things like vaccinations? Like, for instance, if you travel into Africa, you need a yellow fever certificate, and that's normally a document that you put in your passport. So it will be good to actually see that we also consider an electronic way of accommodating things like the yellow fever vaccination and so on.
Who wants to take this answer? Minister.
As the representative from the KwaZulu-Natal government said, that is the issue we need to take up with our counterpart who are in charge of internal security and health to say, yes, we are promoting the e-visa program. How then do we take into consideration this other requirement? Then we will come up with one position, and I am aware that this year the CASA ministers within the SADC, we have come up with a group of the CASA ministers in charge of tourism. We'll be meeting, and those are some of the things that we'll be discussing. Once we adopt it, then they'll be presented to the leaders of governments, the heads of state, who will make a final decision, and then a position will be made.
Okay. Lady at the back there in the red, I think she's just about to get a microphone. Fire away. Is it? Oh, sorry, and you're next after. Sorry.
Thank you. My name is Napumelelo Simelani, and I'm a travel agency. It's called Juices Travel Agency. So because it's a comment that I want to actually put through, because as Africans, I've seen that we are not very creative when it comes to our tourism. I've traveled abroad, and I've bumped into a lot of youth traveling abroad. things that we cannot do in Africa as the youth from probably 18 to 35. I find that we enjoy arts and culture, but I cannot find that in Africa. How are we going to, I find that we don't promote tourism for youth. We promote tourism for adults, probably 35 to 40-year-olds. That's what I'm hearing, because my travel agency is focused on Africa, the top 10 African music festivals, where we travel from Botswana to South Africa to Tanzania. They've got the Sauti za Busara in Tanzania, but I find that people are not warming up to the idea, even though tourism says they're looking for new ideas. I am actually advocating for the youth. What are we doing about the arts and culture?
Okay. All right. You say it was a comment rather than a question. Yes. Okay. Lady in the front, who's your question for?
So anyone in the panel can really answer, but maybe Gillian would be a good option. Are we doing enough to sell Africa to the African corporate market and really getting them to travel? So question, just as an example, on the business tourism side, coming from a corporate BDO, we battle to be able to host some of the training, African training in South Africa because of visa issues. So we end up having half the delegates then only doing half the training, and then it has to move to East Africa, and then it costs more, obviously, because you've got more people traveling and the extent of flight cost, etc. But are we doing enough to really make them see that they should stay within the continent? There's a lot of supplier incentive groups that all go externally. Personal groups that I've seen from South Bakels, etc., tend to do that, Malta, Russia, etc., for large groups, but they haven't actually stayed in Africa.
Okay. Again, no, we're not. We have a long way to go. And I think there's twofold. You need to look at the infrastructure and product development that we have on the continent. For large-scale incentives or business travel, one, we're struggling with air access. How can we move that many people at that amount of time to a different destination? So even if you do have accommodation that can host, so first of all, you have to have accommodation, and you actually have activities for a group to do that is specific to the incentive market because it's different from leisure, how do you get them there all at once? And the second one comes from a sales and marketing perspective. Even if you've done all three, you have an accommodation facility, you have air access, and you have an incentive product. The issue is marketing. There isn't enough education amongst the agents who are selling business travel and incentives. Most of the people are based in South Africa. There's a lot of people sitting here in South Africa saying, well, okay, we're just going to send it across to another province. Nobody's looking at educating incentive booking agents. So there's a big issue of training the agents doing the booking, not so much educating the corporates because they listen to their agent. You don't even need to go out and talk to a corporate and say, look, F&B, why don't you conference somewhere else? No, you have to work with the agents who are doing that.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. The man on the right there. Yes. Who's the question for, please?
Well, this question is basically around the issue of infrastructure. When you look at the road infrastructure as a catalyst to promote and even to enhance the tourism throughout Africa, it's a challenge. And number two, the focus has been more on improving air traffic. But one thing that I see not coming out more often is the ocean traffic in tourism. And ocean traffic is a different experience and a different experiment, given the fact that also can open up opportunities for Africans to own the cruise ship, so that policy making in Africa, throughout Africa, should be to ensure that Africans become owners and entrepreneurs within that line of tourism.
Anybody like to take that one? Minister.
Thank you. The marine transport is key for the promotion of tourism. And I think African countries now are waking up to realization that we need to promote infrastructure. As we promote infrastructure for the growth of the economy, because we cannot talk about sustainable and meaningful the tourism without the infrastructure, because infrastructure is a precursor, it's a catalyst for any growth in the economy. So marine infrastructure is key, and as I said, before I became Minister of Tourism, I was in charge of infrastructure. That included the marine. And at the level of the continent, as ministers, as states, there has been a deliberate resolve that for Africa to attain sustainable economic development, we need to improve in terms of infrastructure. That is aviation, road, marine, and rail infrastructure, inclusive. And I want also to commend the lady, the young lady there, that for us, because if we are to talk about growth in tourism sector, art and culture is the way to go. Art and culture is the way to go. So we need to begin interacting among states. I think that would do well even for tour operators, for lodge and hotel owners. Once we begin promoting art and culture, we need to have a carnival for the art and culture, probably for Africa. And I was privileged yesterday at a chat with the the African Tourism Board, who were suggesting that they would want to come to Zambia next day to host the African the culture, and we said, okay, fine, we can host it in Victoria so that we begin promoting desire in our young generation to connect from one state to another. I think that is the only way we will be able to promote and grow our tourism sector.
One last question. Please keep it brief and specific. Yes, sir, with your hand up there in the aisle. Just behind you.
Honorable Minister, it's a pleasure to have you in the panel.
Thank you.
This question will be directed to you. I visited a family in Zambia, and I appreciated the hospitality, the food from the ground. You know, I enjoyed the carpenter there. And I actually wanted to start questioning by saying, Mashibukeng, Honorable.
Thank you.
So, as I was sending pictures to my friends in Johannesburg, they said, but why did you leave us? I said, okay. They applauded me by saying, from now onwards, you have broken the wall between Zambia and South Africa. And I appreciated it. So I started looking around with the interest of buying some properties in Zambia. I was in Kitwe, I was in Dola. When I saw properties being for sale, I developed interest and started finding out. But to my disappointment, they said to me, according to Zambian rules, I am not allowed to buy a property even if maybe I've got finances. So maybe privately, say we'll have a chat, because I want to start attracting my people, especially from Johannesburg, to go to Zambia. Oh, it's a lovely country. The peace, serenity, the population there, how they relate to, foreigners. I loved it, but I want to buy a property there. I need assistance. Thank you.
I was going to say,
Minister, very briefly, give the lady an answer.
I would meet you, and I want to confirm that in Zambia we have no term like a foreigner. No.
Okay.
We have no foreigner. We have Zambians of decent origin. Okay. You can become, when you come to Zambia, we believe that we are one Africa, we are one world, we are one nation that we need to promote and embrace one another. I'll see you after the final discussion.
But I was going to add that maybe you can come to Ghana.
Well, this is perhaps a little bit about selling tourism. Thank you very much indeed for that esteemed panel. That's Ronald Chilutela, the Minister of Tourism of Zambia. That's Pindili Makwakwa, the acting CEO of KZN Tourism. Also, Akwasi Agimang, the CEO of Ghana Tourism Authority. Gillian Blackbird, the Regional Director, Africa World Travel Tourism. And last but not least, Alain Renaud, the Principal Secretary, Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ports and Marine of the Seychelles. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for at this debate at the 2019 Africa Tourism Leadership Forum here in Durban. From me, Chris Bishop, on behalf of CNBC Africa, it's goodbye.